Beneath the glitter of old money and polished floors, a billionaire family's arrogance knows no bounds. At their grand gala, they publicly humiliate their black maid, dousing her in champagne as the wealthy applaud. They expect her to shrink away, invisible and powerless, but she carries more strength than they could ever imagine. When their cruelty is broadcast for all to see, the billionaire family's empire crumbles overnight, and the woman they tried to break must decide whether to rise up and claim justice in a world that never expected her to fight back. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The darkness outside Clara's window was thick as molasses when her alarm buzzed at 4:30 a.m. Her small hand reached out from under the thin blanket, fumbling to silence the noise before it could wake Darnell in the next room. The springs of her old mattress creaked as she sat up, her bones aching from yesterday's double shift at the Danforth mansion. Their apartment was small, just 2 bedrooms and a kitchen that doubled as their living room. But Clara kept it spotless. The wooden floor was worn but swept clean, and family photos lined the walls, most featuring their mother's bright smile. Clara paused at her favorite picture, touching the frame gently. "Morning, Mama," she whispered, like she did every day. The kitchen light flickered as she turned it on, casting a weak yellow glow over the cramped space. Clara pulled out eggs, the last of their bread, and some nearly expired milk. Her movements were precise, practiced from years of making do with little. The toaster was temperamental, requiring 2 tries before it would accept the bread. While the eggs sizzled in the pan, Clara checked their budget notebook, hidden behind the sugar container. The numbers stared back at her, each one a reminder of how tight things were getting. Darnell's school fees were due next week, and her last paycheck had barely covered their rent. "Something smells good," Darnell's sleepy voice came from behind her. He was already dressed in his school uniform, though his tie hung loose around his neck. "You're up early," Clara said, sliding the eggs onto a plate. "Come here, let me fix that tie." Darnell rolled his eyes but stepped forward, letting her adjust the knot. At 16, he was already taller than her, but sometimes she still saw the little boy who used to hide behind her legs when strangers came around. "You working late again today?" he asked, dropping into one of their mismatched kitchen chairs. Clara nodded, pushing the plate toward him. "Mrs. Danforth's having some kind of fancy dinner party. They'll need extra help with cleanup." She didn't mention how the last party had run until midnight, or how Mrs. Danforth had accidentally spilled wine on Clara's uniform and refused to pay for cleaning. "You shouldn't let them treat you like that," Darnell said, his fork scraping against the plate. "I heard things about the Danforths, how they treat their workers, how they—" "Eat your breakfast," Clara cut him off gently. "Focus on school. That's your job right now." After Darnell left for school, Clara got ready for work, pulling on her gray uniform dress. The fabric was thin from too many washes, but it was clean and pressed. Her mother's voice echoed in her head. "Hold your head high, baby. Don't let them see you bend." The bus ride to the Danforth mansion took 45 minutes, during which Clara wrote in her journal, a habit she'd kept since their mother passed. Today's entry was heavy with worry. "Dear Journal, another morning, another day of counting pennies. Darnell's school fees are due next week, $250. My paycheck won't cover it, not with rent coming up too. Maybe I can pick up some weekend work at the diner again, though last time I did that, Mrs. Danforth complained I was too tired to do my job properly. Yesterday, Mr. Danforth called me girl again, even though I'm 22 years old with more dignity in my little finger than he has in his whole body. But I smiled and nodded, just like Mama taught me. Keep your job. Keep your pride inside, where it's safe." Sometimes, I wonder if things will ever change. Darnell deserves better than this. Better than watching his sister bow and scrape for people who see us as furniture that happens to breathe. He's so smart, so full of dreams. I can't let him down the way this world keeps trying to let us both down. Mrs. Danforth's having another one of her parties tonight. Last time, she made me serve wearing that ridiculous apron with the frills, like some kind of costume from a movie about the good old days. My hands shake just thinking about it, but I keep hearing Mama's voice. Bend like the reed in the wind, baby, but never break. I'm so tired of bending. Clara closed the journal and tucked it back into her bag as the bus approached her stop. Through the window, she could see the Danforth mansion rising up like a mountain of privilege, its windows already gleaming in the morning sun. She straightened her uniform, checked her hair one last time, and prepared to face another day of invisible wounds and silent dignity. The morning sun hadn't yet touched the horizon when Clara's phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Danforth. "Come in early. Silver needs polishing before the gala." Clara's stomach tightened. The annual charity gala was the Danforths' biggest event of the year, which meant double the scrutiny and triple the criticism. She left a note for Darnell next to his breakfast. "Extra hours today. Leftovers in fridge. Love you." The early morning bus was nearly empty, giving Clara time to rehearse her responses to Mrs. Danforth's inevitable complaints. "Yes, ma'am. Right away, ma'am. I'll do better, ma'am." The mansion's kitchen was already buzzing with activity when Clara arrived. Other staff members darted around like startled mice, trying to stay out of Mrs. Danforth's way as she barked orders from the doorway. Clara slipped in through the service entrance, heading straight for the silver cabinet. "You're late," Mrs. Danforth's voice cut through the air like a knife. She stood in her silk robe, perfectly coiffed despite the early hour. Clara checked her watch. 6:58 a.m. Her shift didn't start until 7:00. "I'm sorry, ma'am," she said anyway, reaching for the polish and cloths. The silver service was laid out on the kitchen table, serving trays, candlesticks, and utensils that cost more than Clara made in a year. She began with the largest piece, a Victorian-era punch bowl that Mrs. Danforth's grandmother had supposedly brought over from England. "Careful with that." Mrs. Danforth hovered nearby, her shadow falling across Clara's work. "It's worth more than you'll see in a lifetime." Clara's hands remained steady as she worked the polish into the ornate patterns. Each piece required special attention. Circular motions for the flat surfaces, gentle dabs for the engravings, extra care around the handles. Her mother had taught her how to polish silver years ago, when they both worked for another wealthy family across town. "You missed a spot." Mrs. Danforth's manicured finger pointed to an imaginary smudge. "Really, Clara? If you can't handle basic tasks..." "I'll fix it right away, ma'am." Clara repolished the area, plus 6 inches around it for good measure. Her reflection warped in the silver surface. Dark skin stretched and distorted against the gleaming metal. The morning crawled by. Every piece Clara finished was inspected, criticized, and usually handed back for another round of polishing. Her arms ached, and the chemical smell of polish made her head swim, but she kept working. The gala was tomorrow night, and everything had to be perfect. "Remember," Mrs. Danforth said, as she finally approved the last piece, "tomorrow night is about showing our community how much the Danforth family cares. I won't have anything spoiling that image." By the time Clara got home that evening, her fingers were raw from polishing, and her nose still burned from chemicals. She found Darnell at the kitchen table, textbooks spread out around him, empty pizza box pushed to one side. "You ordered pizza?" Clara asked, hanging up her coat. "That money was supposed to last until payday." "I was hungry." Darnell shrugged, not looking up from his homework. Dark circles under his eyes suggested he'd been studying late again. Clara sighed, sitting down across from him. You need to sleep, Darnell. Those AP classes won't get easier if you're exhausted. I'm fine, he mumbled, finally meeting her eyes. Why'd you quit your old job? The one before the Danforths? We weren't struggling as much then. The question hit Clara like a physical blow. Images flashed through her mind. Another mansion, another wealthy family, another humiliation. She stood up quickly, gathering dishes from the table. That's ancient history. Focus on your homework and try to get some sleep tonight. But, no buts, Clara said firmly, turning to the sink so he wouldn't see her face. The past is the past. We look forward, remember? The water running over the dishes couldn't quite drown out the sound of her heart pounding. Some memories were better left buried, especially with tomorrow's gala looming ahead like a storm on the horizon. The morning of the gala arrived with a frenzy of activity. Clara's muscles still ached from yesterday's silver polishing, but there was no time to rest. She darted between rooms, checking off tasks from her mental list. Fresh flowers in the foyer, place cards arranged perfectly on dining tables, champagne flutes spotless and gleaming. Watch where you're going! Margot Danforth's sharp voice rang out as Clara nearly bumped into her while carrying a stack of fresh linens. The youngest Danforth daughter stood in the hallway, phone in one hand, designer coffee cup in the other. Sorry, Miss Danforth, Clara mumbled, sidestepping quickly. The linens threatened to topple, but she steadied them against her chest. God, why is everyone running around like headless chickens? Carter Danforth emerged from his room, still in his silk pajamas, despite it being nearly noon. He leaned against the door frame, watching Clara struggle with the linens. It's just another boring charity thing. Margot rolled her eyes. Daddy says this one's important. Something about tax write-offs and good PR. She turned to Clara, who was trying to inch past them. You better not mess anything up tonight. We don't need the help embarrassing us. Yeah, Carter smirked, reaching out to flick one of the tablecloths. Try not to trip and spill anything on the guests. Though that might actually make things interesting. Clara bit her tongue and kept moving. The linens needed to be pressed, and on the tables within the hour. She couldn't afford to waste time trading barbs with the Danforth siblings. In the laundry room, Clara worked quickly, pressing each tablecloth to crisp perfection. The iron hissed and steamed, adding to the already humid air. Sweat trickled down her back, but she couldn't stop. There were still dozens of tasks waiting. Need help with those? Maria, one of the newer maids, poked her head in. Without waiting for an answer, she grabbed an iron and started on the pile of napkins. Thanks, Clara said, grateful for the assistance. They worked in companionable silence for a few minutes. The rhythmic sound of irons gliding across fabric filling the small space. I heard Carter and Margot giving you trouble earlier, Maria said finally. Those two, there's something else. Clara shook her head. I've dealt with worse. I believe it. Maria paused, testing the heat of her iron. You know, I worked with your mama years ago. Before... She trailed off, suddenly very interested in a wrinkle that needed pressing. Clara's hands stilled on the tablecloth. You knew my mother? Yeah, over at the Whitman place. She was a good worker, your mama. Real, dignified, just like you. Maria's voice grew quieter. Things ended badly there. What do you mean? Clara turned to face her, the iron forgotten. Her mother had never talked about her time with the Whitmans, had never explained why she'd suddenly quit that job. What happened? Maria's face closed off, her earlier openness disappearing like a door slamming shut. Oh, it's not my place to say. Ancient history now. She grabbed another napkin, avoiding Clara's eyes. We should hurry with these linens. Guests arrive in 6 hours. Maria, please. Clara stepped closer. If you know something. Clara. Mrs. Danforth's voice echoed down the hallway. Where are those tablecloths? The decorators are waiting. Maria quickly gathered the pressed napkins. We better get moving. You know how she gets when things fall behind schedule. Clara watched her hurry out, questions burning in her throat. What had happened to her mother at the Whitmans? Why had Maria clammed up so suddenly? But Mrs. Danforth was calling again, her voice growing more impatient, and Clara had no choice but to gather the pressed tablecloths and return to work. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of last-minute preparations. Clara pushed thoughts of her mother aside, focusing instead on the endless stream of tasks. But Maria's words kept echoing in her mind. Things ended badly there. What secrets lay buried in her mother's past? What shadows lurked behind that careful silence she'd maintained until her death? The evening arrived like a slow-moving storm. Guests in designer clothes and sparkling jewelry streamed through the mansion's grand doors, their voices mixing with the soft classical music played by the string quartet in the corner. Clara stood near the kitchen entrance, a silver tray of champagne flutes balanced carefully in her hands. Remember, serve from the left, Mrs. Peterson, the head housekeeper, whispered as she passed. And smile, but not too much. Clara nodded, her shoulders tense under her crisp black uniform. She'd done this dozens of times before, but tonight felt different. The weight of unsaid things, Maria's words about her mother, the morning's confrontation with the Danforth siblings, pressed down on her like a heavy blanket. Champagne, sir? She offered the tray to a silver-haired man in an expensive suit. He took a glass without looking at her, continuing his conversation about golf memberships. Clara moved through the crowd like a ghost, seen but not seen, heard but not heard. The grand ballroom sparkled with crystal chandeliers and golden light. Fresh flowers perfumed the air, their sweet scent mixing with expensive perfumes and aftershaves. Clara noticed Richard Danforth holding court near the marble fireplace, his laugh carrying across the room as he entertained a group of influential guests. More champagne here, someone called, and Clara changed direction, weaving between clusters of people. She felt eyes following her, some dismissive, some curious, some carrying that familiar weight of judgment she'd learned to recognize over the years. The help seems well-trained tonight, a woman in diamonds remarked to her companion as Clara passed. Though I do miss the old days when they knew their place better. Clara's fingers tightened on the tray, but her face remained neutral. She'd learned long ago to wear her dignity like armor, letting such comments slide off without leaving a mark. The kitchen was a chaos of controlled panic. Servers rushed in and out with trays of hors d'oeuvres, while the catering staff shouted orders and plated tiny works of edible art. Clara exchanged her empty champagne tray for one loaded with delicate canapés. "Watch yourself out there," Maria warned as they passed each other. "Carter's been drinking since 4, and you know how he gets." As if summoned by his name, Carter Danforth's loud voice carried through the kitchen doors. Clara took a deep breath and pushed back into the ballroom. The appetizers needed to circulate before the main speeches began. She made it through half the room without incident, guests absent-mindedly picking from her tray as she passed. The constant motion helped keep her anxiety at bay. Just focus on the task, she told herself. One step at a time. One guest at a time. "Well, if it isn't our favorite server," Carter's voice slurred from somewhere behind her. Clara kept moving, pretending not to hear. She had 3 more sections of the room to cover. A woman in a red gown reached for a canapé, and Clara shifted the tray slightly to make it easier for her to reach. That's when she felt Carter's presence, too close, deliberately stepping into her path. "I said hello," Carter insisted, his breath heavy with expensive scotch. Didn't your mother teach you any manners?" Clara tried to step around him, but he moved with her, a cruel smile playing on his lips. The tray wobbled slightly in her hands. "Excuse me, sir," she said quietly, keeping her voice steady. "I need to serve these before they get cold." "Cold?" Carter laughed too loudly. "Let's check then." He reached for the tray, and Clara instinctively pulled back. That's when he stuck his foot out, just enough to catch her heel as she tried to step away. The world tilted. Clara felt herself stumbling, the tray slipping despite her desperate attempt to hold on. There was a horrible moment of suspended time where she could see everything about to happen, but was powerless to stop it. The crash seemed to silence the entire room. Tiny pieces of food scattered across the marble floor. Worse, several canapes had landed on the silk gown of a woman standing nearby, leaving greasy stains on the expensive fabric. "My dress!" the woman shrieked, batting at the stains with her napkin. "This is Valentino! Do you have any idea how much this costs?" Clara scrambled to pick up the fallen tray, her cheeks burning. From across the room, she felt Richard Danforth's gaze lock onto her. His eyes glittered with dark amusement, like a cat watching a wounded mouse. Carter stood back, watching the scene unfold with satisfied smugness. The orchestra quieted as Richard Danforth tapped his crystal champagne flute with a silver spoon. The sharp ping echoed through the ballroom, drawing all eyes to the raised platform where he stood, backlit by chandeliers. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice carried effortlessly, practiced from years of commanding attention. "Tonight is about more than just raising money. It's about recognizing those who serve our community." Clara's stomach tightened as she collected broken glass from her earlier accident. Something in Richard's tone made her skin prickle with warning. Speaking of service, Richard's eyes found her in the crowd, his smile sharp as a blade. "Clara Bell Johnson, please join me on stage." The room went silent. Clara froze, still kneeling with fragments of glass in her hands. Mrs. Peterson appeared beside her, quickly taking the broken pieces. "Go on," she whispered, her face tight with concern. "Don't keep Mr. Danforth waiting." Clara stood slowly, smoothing her black uniform with trembling hands. The crowd parted as she walked toward the stage, her shoes clicking against marble in the heavy silence. Each step felt like walking through deep water, her legs heavy with dread. "Come, come," Richard beckoned, extending his hand with exaggerated courtesy. "Don't be shy, Clara." She climbed the 3 steps to the platform, keeping her eyes fixed straight ahead. The bright lights felt hot on her face, and hundreds of eyes watched her every move. Some guests already had their phones out, recording. "Clara here has been with us for how long now?" Richard asked, his voice dripping with false warmth. 3 years, sir," she answered quietly. 3 years, Richard boomed. 3 years of, well, interesting service, wouldn't you say? Scattered laughter rippled through the crowd. Though perhaps graceful isn't quite the word we'd use. More laughter, louder this time. Clara spotted Carter in the crowd, smirking as he filmed with his phone. Beside him, Margot whispered something to a group of young socialites who giggled behind their hands. "You know, Clara," Richard continued, placing a heavy hand on her shoulder, "when I was growing up, my father taught me the value of hard work, but he also taught me something else, the importance of knowing one's place." The crowd murmured appreciatively. Clara felt her chest tighten, but she kept her face carefully blank, the way her mother had taught her. "Don't let them see you break. Earlier tonight we had a little incident, didn't we?" Richard gestured to the woman in the stained dress, who was now recording with her phone. "Quite expensive, that little mishap. But then again, you wouldn't know much about designer prices, would you, Clara?" The laughter grew louder. Clara could feel sweat beading at the back of her neck, but she stood straight. dignity her only shield. "I think it's time we taught Clara here about fine things." Richard reached for a fresh bottle of champagne from a nearby server. "This, for instance, is a 1982 Dom Perignon. That's about," he made a show of calculating, "3 months of your salary, isn't it?" The crowd roared. Camera flashes popped like lightning. Clara saw the bottle tilt before she felt it. The cold, expensive champagne streaming over her head, soaking her hair, running down her face and neck, staining her uniform. "There," Richard announced triumphantly. "Now you can say you've had a taste of the good life." The ballroom erupted in laughter and applause. Phones recorded from every angle as champagne dripped from Clara's chin onto her shoes. Through the blur of tears she refused to shed, she saw hundreds of faces, laughing, pointing, recording her humiliation for their entertainment. Clara stepped backward, then turned and fled down the stairs. She pushed through the crowd, past the pointing fingers and cruel laughter, past Mrs. Peterson's outstretched hand, past the kitchen where Maria called her name. She ran until she reached the service entrance, bursting out into the cool night air. Only then did she let the tears fall, mixing with the champagne that still dripped from her hair. Later that night, in her small apartment, Clara sat on her bed with her phone in her hands. The video was everywhere: Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. Thousands of shares, hundreds of thousands of views. Comments ranged from outraged to amused, but all she could see was her own face, frozen in that moment of public shame, played over and over again for the world to see. Clara's phone buzzed again, the screen lighting up her dark bedroom. 3:47 a.m. She hadn't slept at all. The notifications kept coming: Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, even emails from strangers who'd somehow found her address. She scrolled through the messages, her eyes burning from exhaustion and dried tears. Some were kind. "Stay strong, sister. We're with you." "This is absolutely disgusting behavior." But others cut deep. "Should have kept your head down." "Looking for attention?" "Just another race baiter trying to get rich." The champagne had dried in her hair, leaving it stiff and sticky. She'd showered 3 times but still felt dirty, like the humiliation had seeped into her skin. Her uniform lay crumpled in the corner, reeking of expensive alcohol and shame. A text from Mrs. Peterson popped up. "There are reporters outside the mansion. Mr. Danforth says, don't come in today." Clara's hands shook. Don't come in? Was she fired? How would she pay Darnell's school fees? Speaking of Darnell, she heard him stirring in the next room. The wall-mounted TV in the living room was still running news coverage. She'd left it on all night, unable to look away from her own public shaming played on repeat. "Clara?" Darnell appeared in her doorway, his school uniform already on. "There's people outside our building." She rushed to the window. Sure enough, a small crowd had gathered on the sidewalk below. Some held signs, "Justice for Clara," and "Boycott Danforth Industries." Others had cameras and microphones. "You're not going to school today," Clara said firmly. "I'll call you in sick." "But I have a test." "Not today, Darnell." Her voice cracked. "Please, just not today." Her phone rang, an unknown number. She declined it, like she had dozens of others. The TV droned in the background. Protests continue outside the Danforth estate after viral video shows wealthy businessman Richard Danforth pouring champagne over his maid's head during a charity gala. Clara made Darnell breakfast, though neither of them ate much. She kept checking her phone, watching the view count climb. 500,000. 1 million. 2 million. Each number felt like another weight on her chest. A text from Maria, another maid. "They're saying terrible things about you, Clara. The Danforths are telling everyone you staged it for attention, that you've been trouble since day one." The room spun. Clara sat heavily on the couch, her legs weak. Of course, they'd try to destroy her reputation. What else had she expected? Around noon, someone knocked on her door. Clara froze, but the knocking continued, gentle but persistent. "Ms. Johnson?" a male voice called. "I'm DeMarcus Willis, a civil rights attorney. I'm here with Inez Morales from the Daily Chronicle. We'd like to speak with you." Clara approached the door cautiously. Through the peephole, she saw a well-dressed black man in his late 30s, holding a leather briefcase. Beside him stood a Latina woman with a press badge, her expression serious but kind. "How did you find my address?" Clara called through the door. "Your neighbor, Mrs. Washington, directed us," the woman, Inez, answered. "We came through the back entrance to avoid the cameras. We're here to help, Ms. Johnson." Clara glanced at Darnell, who nodded encouragingly. Slowly, she undid the chain and opened the door. DeMarcus Willis extended his hand. "What happened to you last night was more than just humiliation, Ms. Johnson. It was assault, discrimination, and a violation of your basic human dignity. And we're going to make sure the Danforths answer for it." "They're too powerful," Clara whispered. "Nobody ever wins against them." "Nobody's tried with evidence this clear," Inez said, holding up her tablet. "The videos reached 3 million views. People are outraged. Major news networks want to cover this. And I've already started digging into the Danforths' history. You're not their first victim, just the first one they were stupid enough to humiliate on camera. We can file charges," DeMarcus added, "civil and criminal. But more importantly, we can expose the systemic abuse that families like the Danforths have gotten away with for generations, if you're willing to fight." Clara looked at Darnell, then back at her visitors. Her hands were still shaking, but something else was building in her chest. A spark of hope, or maybe rage, or maybe both. Clara sat on her worn couch, clutching a throw pillow as the Danforths appeared on her TV screen. They stood behind a forest of microphones in front of their mansion, the perfect picture of wealthy concern. Richard Danforth wore his most expensive suit, while Lucille dabbed at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. "We deeply regret the misunderstanding that occurred at our annual charity gala," Richard began, his voice dripping with fake sincerity. "The incident with Ms. Johnson was meant as a playful moment between employer and employee. Nothing more." Clara's fingers dug into the pillow. Playful? Her public humiliation had been playful? "We've employed Clara for several years," Lucille added, her voice trembling. "We've treated her like family, paid for her brother's school supplies, given her advances when she needed them. To see her turn on us like this, to twist a harmless joke into something so ugly." She pressed the handkerchief to her eyes. "That's a lie," Clara whispered. They'd never given her anything but the bare minimum wage, and she'd had to fight for even that. Margot stepped forward next, her designer dress and perfect makeup a stark contrast to Clara's wrinkled t-shirt and unwashed hair. Clara's always been difficult, moody. We tried to include her, but she kept herself separate. And now she's using this unfortunate incident to attack my family's reputation." The rage built in Clara's chest, hot and suffocating. She'd kept herself separate because every interaction had been laced with mockery and contempt. Because Margot had made a game of leaving messes for Clara to clean, of interrupting her work to send her on pointless errands. "We hope Ms. Johnson will accept our sincere apology," Richard concluded smoothly, "and we trust the public will see this for what it is, an opportunistic attempt to damage a family that has given so much to this community." The press conference cut to a montage of Danforth charitable works. Richard cutting ribbons, Lucille hosting fundraisers, the family donating oversized checks to carefully selected causes, all while paying their workers poverty wages, all while treating people like Clara as less than human. Her phone buzzed. "DeMarcus, Don't let them get to you. This is exactly what we expected. We're preparing our response. But it wasn't just the Danforths' lies that hurt. It was the comments scrolling across social media. She should be grateful to have a job. If you can't take a joke, don't work for the rich. Playing the race card for a payday. Clara got dressed for work anyway. She couldn't afford to miss another day, not with rent due and Darnell's school expenses piling up. She put on her spare uniform, did her best to look professional despite her exhaustion. The mansion's gates were closed when she arrived. 2 new security guards stood watch, large men in dark suits who'd never been there before. Clara showed her ID badge. "Sorry," one said, not sounding sorry at all. "You're not on the approved list." "I work here," Clara insisted. "I've worked here for 3 years." "Not anymore." The guard handed her an envelope. "This came for you." Clara's hand shook as she opened it. The letter was typed on expensive Danforth letterhead. "Dear Ms. Johnson, your employment is hereby terminated for cause, effective immediately. Grounds for termination include insubordination, creating a hostile work environment, and damaging the company's reputation through false allegations." The words blurred as tears filled her eyes. She'd expected this, but seeing it in writing made it real. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from her landlord, Mr. Green. "Need to discuss your living situation. Rent's going up. If you can't afford it, might be time to find other arrangements." Clara knew what that meant. The Danforths owned half the rental properties in town through shell companies. Mr. Green was just another puppet on their strings. She stood at the gates, letter crumpled in her fist, watching other maids and gardeners file past her with averted eyes. People she'd worked beside for years, shared lunches with, covered shifts for. Now they wouldn't even look at her. "You need to leave," the guard said, "before we have to call the police." Clara backed away, her legs unsteady. Everything she'd worked for, everything she'd built to support Darnell, was crumbling. And still, the mansion loomed behind her, untouchable and imposing, its windows reflecting the morning sun like cold, mocking eyes. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Inez Morales navigated the courthouse basement's maze of filing cabinets. The musty air made her nose itch, but she'd learned long ago that the best stories often lurked in these forgotten archives. "You sure you want to go back that far?" The elderly clerk, Mrs. Patterson, adjusted her glasses. "Those files are ancient history." 20 years isn't that ancient," Inez said, following her down another narrow aisle. "And sometimes old wounds tell us everything we need to know about new ones." Mrs. Patterson shrugged and pointed to a row of cabinets. "Employment disputes from that period are in there. Good luck finding anything useful. Rich folks know how to bury their secrets." Inez waited until the clerk shuffled away before pulling out drawer after drawer. Her fingers moved methodically through the files, scanning names and dates. The Danforths appeared frequently, always as defendants, always emerging unscathed. 3 hours and a cramped neck later, she almost missed it. A thin file, stuck between 2 thicker ones. Johnson, Marie vs. Danforth Industries, 2003. Marie Johnson, Clara's mother. Inez's hands trembled slightly as she opened the file. The first page was a complaint, the ink faded but still legible. Marie Johnson had worked as a housekeeper for the Danforths, just like her daughter. She'd filed suit for wrongful termination, assault, and emotional distress. "Oh my God," Inez whispered, reading further. According to the complaint, Richard Danforth had grabbed Marie's arm hard enough to leave bruises when she'd refused his advances. When she'd threatened to report him, she'd been fired. The next day, her apartment had been broken into, though nothing was stolen. The file contained photos of Marie's bruises, medical reports, even statements from other employees who'd witnessed Danforth's behavior. But halfway through, everything stopped. A confidential settlement agreement sealed by court order. The witnesses had recanted. The case had vanished. Inez checked her phone. 3 missed calls from DeMarcus. He'd been trying to build their current case, but the Danforths' lawyers kept throwing up roadblocks. Now she understood why they were so practiced at it. She drove straight to Clara's apartment, the file burning a hole in her messenger bag. The building was run down, paint peeling from the walls, but Clara's unit stood out. Small touches like a welcome mat and a potted plant gave it dignity. Clara opened the door, looking exhausted. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, but she managed a small smile. "Inez? I wasn't expecting you today." "I found something," Inez said gently. "Something you need to see. Can I come in?" They sat at Clara's small kitchen table. Homework papers were spread across one end. Darnell's math assignments, carefully checked and corrected in Clara's neat handwriting. She was still taking care of everyone else, even as her world fell apart. "This might be hard to read," Inez warned, sliding the file across the table. Clara opened it. Her face remained composed as she read the first page, but her hands began to shake. By the second page, tears rolled silently down her cheeks. "I never knew," she whispered. "Mama never said a word. Not one word." "She couldn't," Inez explained. "The settlement included a strict confidentiality clause. If she'd told anyone, she'd have lost everything." Clara stood abruptly, pacing the small kitchen. She got sick right after that job, started having panic attacks, couldn't sleep. The doctors called it anxiety and depression, but she pressed her fist to her mouth. "They did this to her. They broke her." "The pattern is clear," Inez said. "They haven't changed in 20 years. They're still using the same tactics: intimidation, threats, buying silence." Clara picked up her mother's photo from the windowsill. In it, Marie Johnson smiled broadly, her arm around a young Clara's shoulders. It was taken before the Danforths, before the light had gone out of her eyes. "She took that job to send me to college," Clara said, her voice cracking. "But then she got sick, and the money went to doctors instead. She died thinking she'd failed me. But she was the victim. They killed her dreams, her spirit, everything she worked for." Clara sat across from DeMarcus in his downtown office, her mother's file spread between them on his weathered oak desk. Morning sunlight streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the documents that told a story of 2 generations of pain. "They didn't just hurt me," Clara said, her voice steady despite the anger burning in her chest. "They've been doing this for decades. To my mama, to who knows how many others." DeMarcus leaned forward, his expression intense. "This changes everything, Clara. Your mother's case proves a pattern of behavior. We can use this." "I want to tell her story," Clara said firmly. "Not just mine. Every worker who ever suffered in silence needs to know they're not alone." "Are you sure?" DeMarcus asked. "Going public means they'll come at you even harder." "I'm done being afraid." Clara straightened her shoulders. "Mama couldn't speak up because of their threats. But I can. I will." That afternoon, Clara sat for an interview with Inez in a small studio downtown. The cameras felt intimidating, but Clara focused on the photo of her mother she'd brought, the one from happier days. "My mother, Marie Johnson, worked for the Danforths 20 years ago," Clara began, her voice growing stronger with each word. "She was a proud woman, hard-working, with dreams for her children. But they didn't see her humanity. They saw someone they could use and discard." As Clara shared the details from the file, the assault, the threats, the forced silence, her hands remained steady. "When I found these documents, so many things made sense. The way Mama changed after that job. How she'd wake up screaming some nights. the panic attacks that eventually wore down her heart. The Danforths claimed my public humiliation was an isolated incident, Clara continued, looking directly into the camera. But this proves otherwise. They've been terrorizing workers for decades, using their money and power to bury the truth. Well, I'm digging it up, all of it. The interview aired that evening. Within hours, Clara's phone lit up with messages from former Danforth employees, each with their own story of abuse and intimidation. DeMarcus's office began documenting every account, building a mountain of evidence that couldn't be ignored. "You did good," DeMarcus told her after reviewing the footage. "Real good. People are listening." Clara felt a weight lift from her shoulders. For the first time since the champagne incident, she felt truly powerful. She was no longer just a victim. She was her mother's voice, finally breaking 20 years of enforced silence. But the Danforths' retaliation came swift and cruel. Clara was helping Darnell with his chemistry homework when her phone buzzed. It was Darnell's friend Marcus. "Police got D at the corner store!" Clara's heart stopped. She grabbed her keys and raced to her car, praying the whole way. She found Darnell sitting on the curb outside the convenience store, surrounded by 3 police cruisers with flashing lights. 2 officers stood over him, their hands on their weapons. "That's my brother!" Clara called out, approaching slowly with her hands visible. "What's going on?" Store reported a shoplifting suspect matching his description, one officer said, his tone dismissive. "Just doing our job." "I didn't steal anything," Darnell protested. "They can check the cameras." Clara noticed the store owner watching nervously through the window. She'd seen him chat easily with Darnell dozens of times before. Something wasn't right. After 30 tense minutes of questioning, the officers finally admitted there was no evidence and let Darnell go. As they drove away, Clara saw a familiar black SUV, the same one that had been parked outside their apartment last week. The Danforths' security detail. Back home, Darnell paced their small living room, angry tears in his eyes. "They planned this, didn't they? Because of your interview?" Clara pulled him into a tight hug. "Listen to me," she said fiercely. "What happened to Mama? What's happening to us? It stops now. I promise you, Darnell. The Danforths will never hurt our family again." Darnell hugged her back just as tight. "I believe you," he whispered, "and I'm not scared of them either." The morning after Clara's interview aired, a crowd gathered outside the Danforth mansion. Not just protesters this time. Former employees clutching papers and photos, each with a story to tell. DeMarcus and his team set up a temporary intake center at a nearby church, interviewing witnesses from dawn to dusk. Clara sat with each person, holding their hands as they shared decades of abuse. An elderly janitor described working through chemotherapy because the Danforths threatened to cancel his health insurance. A former secretary showed documentation of systematic wage theft that had stolen thousands from the cleaning staff. A groundskeeper revealed photos of unsafe working conditions that had left 3 workers permanently injured. "They made us sign papers," a former housekeeper explained, her hands shaking as she handed over a stack of NDAs. "Said they'd blacklist us if we ever spoke up. But seeing you on TV, Miss Clara, if you can stand up to them, so can we." Inez worked furiously, cross-referencing testimonies and documents. Her office walls became a spiderweb of red string connecting photos, statements, and evidence. The pattern was clear. Decades of worker exploitation, all carefully hidden behind the Danforths' charitable facade. "Look at this," Inez called Clara and DeMarcus over one afternoon, pointing to a series of spreadsheets. Every time they fired someone unfairly, they logged it as a voluntary resignation to avoid unemployment claims. The numbers are staggering. DeMarcus nodded grimly. Classic wage theft pattern. But this is bigger than we thought. These documents show systematic discrimination. They specifically targeted older workers, minorities, anyone they thought wouldn't fight back. Clara studied the faces in the growing collection of victim photos. Just like Mama, they picked people who needed the job too badly to risk speaking up. The evidence kept mounting. A former accountant brought internal memos showing the Danforths had created fake job titles to avoid paying overtime. Security camera footage revealed Richard Danforth screaming at elderly workers, making them cry. Email chains exposed Margot Danforth's habit of firing staff who didn't laugh at her racist jokes. But the biggest breakthrough came from an unexpected source. "Clara!" Inez burst into DeMarcus's office one rainy morning, clutching her laptop. "Remember those charity galas? The ones where they supposedly raised money for underprivileged youth?" Clara's jaw tightened. "Like the one where Richard poured champagne on me? How could I forget? Well, I've been following the money." Inez laid out a complex web of financial documents. "Those scholarships they claim to fund? Most of them don't exist. The money went into offshore accounts, then got funneled back through shell companies. They've been using their charity foundation as a personal piggy bank for years." DeMarcus whistled low. "Tax fraud, wire fraud, misappropriation of charitable funds. This is federal territory now." Clara leaned forward, studying the numbers. All those rich people at their parties, thinking they were helping poor kids. It was just another scam? Exactly. Inez pulled up more documents. And here's the best part. They got sloppy. Started using the foundation money for personal expenses. Designer clothes, vacation homes, even Margot's failed jewelry line. All illegal, all documented. They worked through the night, organizing the evidence. DeMarcus called in financial experts to verify every detail. By morning, they had ironclad proof of years of financial crimes. "We need to go public," DeMarcus said, reviewing their presentation one final time. "Not just a statement, a full press conference. Show everyone exactly who the Danforths really are." Clara nodded, thinking of her mother, of Darnell, of every worker who'd been silenced. "When?" "Tomorrow morning." Major networks are already interested. This story's too big to ignore. They gathered in DeMarcus's conference room, preparing their statements. Clara watched Inez arrange the evidence boards, while DeMarcus rehearsed his opening remarks. The weight of what they were about to do hung heavy in the air. "You ready for this?" DeMarcus asked Clara softly. She touched the locket containing her mother's photo. More than ready. It's time everyone knew the truth. Clara stood at the podium, cameras flashing like lightning. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice rang clear and strong through the packed conference room. "My name is Clara Bell Johnson," she began, looking directly into the main camera. "2 weeks ago, Richard Danforth poured champagne over my head at his charity gala. He thought it was funny. His guests laughed. They filmed it on their phones. But that moment wasn't just about humiliating me. It was about power. The power they thought they had to treat people like they're nothing." She pulled out her mother's old employee ID card, holding it up. "This was my mother's. She worked for the Danforths 20 years ago. I never knew why she came home crying some nights. Never knew why she suddenly quit. Never knew that she tried to fight back, tried to take them to court when Richard Danforth assaulted her. They buried her case, paid her off, made her sign papers promising she'd never tell anyone, not even her own daughter." The room had gone completely silent. Even the most jaded reporters leaned forward, captivated by Clara's quiet intensity. But my mother's story wasn't unique. Over the past week, dozens of former employees have come forward, each one carrying proof of the Danforths' crimes. She gestured to the evidence boards behind her. Wage theft, discrimination, unsafe working conditions, assault, all carefully hidden behind their fancy parties and fake charity work. Inez stepped forward, directing attention to specific documents. The Danforth Family Foundation claimed to provide scholarships to underprivileged youth. Our investigation has uncovered that these scholarships were largely fictional. The money, millions in charitable donations, was diverted through offshore accounts and shell companies, ultimately funding the Danforths' lavish lifestyle. DeMarcus took over, his legal expertise lending weight to each accusation. We have documented evidence of systematic wage theft affecting hundreds of employees over decades. The Danforths specifically targeted vulnerable workers, immigrants, single parents, elderly employees desperate to keep their health insurance. They forced them to work overtime without pay, denied benefits, and threatened anyone who dared complain. Clara returned to the podium. Her voice shook with controlled anger. When Richard Danforth poured that champagne on me, he thought I would stay quiet, like my mother did, like all their victims did. But times have changed. We're not staying quiet anymore. The questions erupted like a storm. Clara answered each one clearly, directing reporters to specific pieces of evidence. The live stream numbers skyrocketed as viewers shared the feed. Danforth crimes started trending within minutes. Hours later, as darkness fell over the city, a fleet of black SUVs pulled up to the Danforth estate's gates. Federal agents moved with precise efficiency, presenting search warrants to the startled security guards. News vans arrived moments later, their bright lights illuminating the scene like a movie set. Inside, Richard Danforth was shouting into his phone, demanding his lawyers fix this. Lucille frantically shredded documents in her office, but it was too late. The evidence was already public, backed up in multiple locations. Cameras rolled as agents led Richard Danforth out in handcuffs. His face, usually so smug and controlled, was twisted with rage. "This is ridiculous," he bellowed. "Do you know who I am?" Lucille emerged next, her designer outfit clashing with the steel handcuffs. She kept her head high, but her carefully maintained composure cracked when reporters shouted questions about the fake charity foundation. Local news caught the moment live. The mighty Danforths being helped into police vehicles like common criminals. Their mansion, usually so imposing, looked suddenly hollow under the harsh media lights. Neighbors gathered on their manicured lawns, watching in stunned silence as the empire crumbled. On a small TV in Clara's apartment, Darnell watched the arrests unfold. "They really did it," he whispered. "They really took them down." Clara sat beside him, holding their mother's photo. She thought of all the workers who'd found their voice, all the buried stories finally coming to light. The Danforths had spent decades building walls of money and influence to protect themselves. But in the end, the truth had torn those walls down. The news helicopters circled overhead, capturing the final moments of the raid. Agents carried out box after box of documents. The Danforth name, once synonymous with power and prestige, would now be forever linked to fraud and exploitation. The morning after the arrests, the Danforth empire began to crumble with breathtaking speed. Clara watched from her kitchen table as financial news channels tracked the collapse in real time. The family's stock prices plummeted, triggering automatic trading halts. "Breaking news," the anchor announced. "Major investors are pulling out of Danforth Industries following last night's arrests. The company's shares have dropped 60% since markets opened." Darnell sat beside her, munching cereal and staring at the scrolling headlines. "Look at that," he pointed. "Their biggest partner just canceled all contracts." The phone buzzed. It was Inez sending updates. Federal investigators had frozen the Danforths' accounts overnight, personal and business. Their credit cards were declined. Staff at their various properties walked off the job. The carefully crafted image of untouchable wealth shattered like cheap glass. "Global Partners terminates relationship with Danforth Industries," one headline declared. Another, "Charity organizations distance themselves from Danforth Foundation scandal." Social media exploded, with former business associates rushing to condemn the Danforths. The same people who had laughed at Clara's humiliation now posted long statements about their shock and disappointment at the family's behavior. "Bunch of fake friends," Darnell muttered, reading the posts. They knew what the Danforths were like. They just didn't care until now. Clara nodded, thinking of all the times she'd seen those same socialites ignore the staff's mistreatment. "Money buys a lot of blind eyes," she said quietly. The news shifted to live coverage outside Danforth Industries headquarters. Employees streamed out carrying boxes, many looking shell-shocked. Security guards posted notices on the doors. The building was being seized as part of the federal investigation. Sources say the company's board of directors has called an emergency meeting, the reporter stated. Multiple executives have already resigned. The SEC has suspended trading of all Danforth-related stocks. Clara's phone kept buzzing with messages from other former employees. Many were crying with relief, sharing stories they'd kept hidden for years. Some offered to testify about their experiences. The dam of fear had broken, releasing a flood of long-buried truths. By afternoon, auctioneers arrived at the Danforth mansion. They methodically cataloged everything: the antique furniture, the art collection, the fleet of luxury cars. Even Margot's infamous designer wardrobe would be sold to help repay their victims. "Live from the Danforth estate," a reporter announced, where federal agents continue to uncover evidence of massive financial fraud. The family's assets are being inventoried for eventual auction. Early estimates suggest tens of millions in illegally obtained wealth. Cameras showed workers removing paintings from the walls, carrying out silver services, loading crystal chandeliers into trucks. The same ballroom where Clara had been humiliated was now stripped bare, its gleaming floors scuffed by workers' boots. The Danforth Foundation's supposed scholarship recipients are speaking out, another reporter said. Many confirm they never received the promised funds. The foundation appears to have been little more than a tax shelter and money laundering operation. Clara watched as they interviewed students who'd been promised life-changing scholarships, only to have the offers mysteriously withdrawn. Each story echoed her own experience. Hope dangled, then cruelly snatched away, always with the same smug Danforth smile. "Look," Darnell pointed to a new headline. "Their country club memberships got canceled. All their fancy friends are running away." The news showed Richard and Lucille's mugshots, his face purple with rage, her mascara smeared despite her attempt to maintain dignity. Their bail had been denied due to flight risk. The judge, not one of their usual friendly faces, cited the overwhelming evidence of ongoing criminal enterprise. Clara made tea as they watched auctioneers catalog the Danforth's wine cellar. Bottles worth thousands would be sold off, the proceeds going to a victim restitution fund. She thought of that champagne poured over her head, how it had felt like acid on her skin. "You okay?" Darnell asked softly, seeing her lost in thought. She smiled, really smiled, for the first time in weeks. "Yeah," she said. "I think I am." They sat together, watching justice unfold in real time. The Danforth name, once a symbol of untouchable power, now became synonymous with corruption exposed. Their carefully constructed world of privilege collapsed like a house of cards in a strong wind. The courthouse steps swarmed with reporters and cameras as Clara walked up with DeMarcus and Inez. After months of preparation, the Danforth criminal trial was finally beginning. The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble columns, and Clara pulled her jacket closer against the chill. "You ready?" DeMarcus asked quietly. Clara nodded, watching more former Danforth employees gather near the entrance. Some she recognized, others she'd only met during trial prep. All carried the same mix of determination and nervousness on their faces. Inside the courtroom, Richard and Lucille Danforth sat at the defense table in orange jumpsuits, a jarring contrast to their usual designer clothes. Their expensive lawyers clustered around them like worried hens. Richard's face was fixed in its familiar sneer, but Clara noticed his hands trembling slightly as he shuffled papers. The prosecutor, Sandra Chen, laid out the government's case in her opening statement. "The evidence will show that the Danforths built their empire on systematic abuse, discrimination, and fraud," she declared. "They treated their workers like property, destroyed lives for sport, and stole millions meant for charity." The defense tried painting the Danforths as misunderstood philanthropists, victims of cancel culture and mob mentality. But their practiced smoothness felt hollow in the face of what was to come. One by one, former employees took the stand. A kitchen worker described being forced to work 16-hour days without overtime. A gardener testified about racial slurs Richard used casually, like they were normal conversation. A housekeeper broke down crying as she recounted Lucille throwing hot coffee at her for using the wrong china. "Mrs. Danforth said, 'I was too stupid to deserve minimum wage,'" an elderly former maid testified, her voice shaking. "When I asked about my missing paychecks, Mr. Danforth threatened to have me deported." Clara watched Lucille's face as each witness spoke. The socialite's practiced smile cracked a little more with every damning story. She whispered furiously to her lawyers, who looked increasingly uncomfortable. A young accounting clerk revealed how the Danforths laundered money through their charity foundation. "They made me create fake scholarship recipients," she explained. "The money went straight to their personal accounts or to bribe people who threatened to expose them." The prosecution displayed years of doctored financial records. Each document showed a pattern of theft and fraud so blatant that several jurors visibly recoiled. The Danforths had stolen from charities, employees, and even their own business partners. They treated the foundation like their personal piggy bank, the forensic accountant testified. Millions meant for underprivileged students instead funded their vacations, jewelry, and hush money payments. During breaks, Clara sat with other witnesses in a private room. They shared stories of their time working for the family, finding bitter comfort in their shared experiences. Many had believed they were alone in their suffering, that no one would believe them against the mighty Danforths. "I still have nightmares about that house," one woman confided. "The way they'd make us feel so small, like we weren't even human." Back in court, security footage showed Richard assaulting a maintenance worker who dared to ask about unsafe conditions. Photos documented injuries inflicted by the family's casual cruelty. Email chains revealed their gleeful planning of ways to humiliate staff for entertainment. Margot Danforth was called to testify about her role in the family's schemes. She strutted to the witness stand in designer prison orange, still trying to maintain her socialite air. But her carefully applied makeup couldn't hide her fear as prosecutors questioned her about witness intimidation. "Daddy said we had to teach them their place," she said, her voice smaller than Clara had ever heard it. "We'd make examples of anyone who complained." The testimony about Clara's champagne humiliation drew gasps from the jury. The viral video played on courtroom screens, showing Richard's smug face as he poured the expensive drink over her head. Several jurors glared at him openly. "It was a regular game for them," another witness explained. "They'd set up staff to fail, film our humiliation, then threaten to release the videos if we spoke up." Clara's own testimony came late in the trial. She described not just her own abuse, but her mother's hidden suffering years before. Her voice stayed steady as she detailed the pattern of discrimination, the calculated cruelty, the systematic destruction of dignity. "They didn't just hurt us physically or financially," she testified. "They tried to break our spirit, make us believe we deserved their abuse." Richard's face turned purple as she spoke. He leaned forward, trying to intimidate her with his glare like he had so many times before. But Clara kept her eyes forward, her voice clear. His power over her was gone. The defense tried claiming the Danforths were simply old-fashioned employers who didn't understand modern sensitivities. But their arguments fell flat against the mountain of evidence and testimony. Even their own witnesses seemed reluctant to defend the family's actions. As the trial neared its end, the courtroom grew more crowded. Reporters filled every available seat, their pens scratching as they documented the Danforths' fall. Former business associates who'd once courted the family's favor now watched from the gallery with carefully blank expressions. The jury took less than 6 hours to reach their verdict. Clara sat between DeMarcus and Inez as the forewoman stood, her heart pounding. The courtroom fell silent. On the charge of criminal fraud, we find the defendants guilty, the forewoman read. On the charge of criminal discrimination, guilty. On the charge of criminal harassment, guilty. On the charge of witness intimidation, guilty. The list went on, a litany of guilt for every charge. Clara watched Richard's face crumple as each verdict hit him. Lucille swayed in her seat, her perfect mask finally shattering completely. Behind them, Margot burst into noisy tears. The judge's gavel echoed through the hushed courtroom, making the moment official. The mighty Danforths, who had considered themselves above the law, were now convicted criminals facing decades in prison. The afternoon sun streamed through DeMarcus's office windows as Clara sat across from him, staring at the settlement papers in disbelief. The numbers seemed impossible. 8 figures, with substantial compensation for every victim who'd come forward. This is real? Clara's hands trembled as she held the document. They actually agreed to all of it? DeMarcus grinned, leaning back in his chair. With their assets frozen and criminal convictions on record, they didn't have much choice. The civil suit was airtight. Clara scanned the details again. Beyond individual payments, the settlement required the creation of a multi-million-dollar fund to help exploited workers across the state. Money for legal aid, job training, emergency housing, everything she and DeMarcus had demanded. "Look at this section," DeMarcus said, pointing to a paragraph. "The fund will be overseen by a new nonprofit focused on worker protection and social justice reform. And Clara," he paused, his smile widening, "they want you to run it." "Me?" Clara's head snapped up. "But I don't have any experience running an organization." "You organized witnesses, coordinated with media, rallied community support. You've been basically running one already," DeMarcus countered. "Plus, you understand these issues from the inside. Who better to lead this fight?" Clara stood and walked to the window, processing everything. Below, the city stretched out, filled with countless others facing the same battles she had. With this settlement, she could actually help them. "The salary's good too," DeMarcus added. "Enough to put Darnell through college with plenty left over." Tears welled in Clara's eyes as she thought of her brother. He'd stuck by her through everything, believing in her even when she doubted herself. Now she could give him the future their mother had dreamed of. "There's something else," DeMarcus said softly. He pulled out another document. "The settlement includes a formal apology and acknowledgement of your mother's case. They have to publicly recognize what they did to her." Clara's throat tightened. She remembered finding her mother's hidden legal papers, understanding at last why she'd grown so quiet and withdrawn in her final years. The Danforths hadn't just taken her job, they'd stolen her voice, her dignity, her spirit. "We're holding a press conference tomorrow to announce everything," DeMarcus continued. "But I thought you might want some time first to visit her, share the news privately." Clara nodded, unable to speak. She gathered her things, hugging DeMarcus tightly before leaving. The drive to the cemetery was familiar. She'd made it countless times since her mother's passing. seeking guidance or simply connection. The small headstone sat beneath an old oak tree, modest but well-tended. Clara had planted flowers around it, keeping the space beautiful despite their limited means. Now she could afford a proper monument, something that told her mother's whole story. She knelt beside the grave, laying a perfect white rose against the stone. The flower's petals caught the late afternoon light, glowing like they were made of pearl. "Hi, Mama," Clara whispered. "I did it. We did it. They can't hurt anyone else now." Wind rustled through the oak leaves above, almost like a response. Clara traced her mother's name on the stone, remembering her gentle hands, her quiet strength, the way she'd somehow kept hope alive despite everything. "They tried to erase you, make it like nothing happened, but everyone knows the truth now." Clara's voice grew stronger. "Your story's going to help protect other people. No one else will have to hide their pain like you did." She told her mother about the settlement, the fund, the job offer. Words poured out as tears fell freely. Years of carried burden finally lifting. Her mother had always said truth would win in the end, even when the path seemed impossible. "I'm going to make sure no one forgets," Clara promised. "Not just what they did, but who you really were. Strong, loving, unbreakable. They thought they could silence us, but your voice is louder now than ever." The setting sun painted the sky in shades of purple and gold. Clara stayed kneeling, one hand on the cool stone, feeling more connected to her mother than she had in years. The weight of secrecy was gone, replaced by purpose and possibility. "Darnell's doing so well in school," she continued softly. "He wants to study law now, can you believe it? Says he wants to help people like DeMarcus does." She smiled through her tears. "He has your determination, your heart." Birds called evening songs in the distance. The cemetery was peaceful, no longer a place of sorrow but of healing. Clara had fought not just for herself, but for her mother's memory, for Darnell's future, for everyone who'd ever felt powerless against injustice. "I wish you could see this, Mama. See how many people stood with us, how many lives will change because of what happened." Clara wiped her eyes. "But maybe you can. Maybe you've been watching all along, giving me strength when I needed it most." The white rose gleamed in the fading light, a symbol of the truth finally brought into the open. Clara touched the petals gently, remembering how her mother had loved flowers, finding beauty even in their hardest times. "Your story matters," Clara whispered. "It always did. And I promise, Mama, no one will ever erase it again." The autumn breeze carried the scent of fresh paint and new beginnings as Clara stood before the transformed Danforth mansion. Gone were the pretentious gold fixtures and stuffy furnishings. In their place, warm colors and welcoming spaces filled what was now the Marie Bell Johnson Community Center. Hundreds of people gathered on the sprawling lawn, sitting in neat rows of white chairs. Clara recognized many faces: former Danforth employees, local activists, supporters who'd stood with her through the darkest days. Even some of the party guests who'd witnessed her humiliation were there, wearing expressions of shame and respect. Darnell sat in the front row, beaming with pride. At 17, he'd grown taller than Clara, but his eyes still held that same fierce loyalty. He wore a crisp suit for the occasion, already looking every bit the future lawyer he dreamed of becoming. Clara smoothed her navy blue dress, not a uniform this time, but a choice that made her feel powerful, and approached the podium. The same stage where Richard Danforth had once mocked her now belonged to her voice alone. "Welcome," she began, her voice carrying clearly across the hushed crowd. "6 months ago, I stood in this very spot, experiencing what I thought was the worst moment of my life." She paused, letting the memory settle. "I was wrong. That moment wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. A murmur of agreement rippled through the audience. Clara caught DeMarcus's encouraging nod from his seat beside Darnell. "This building held generations of pain," she continued. "Not just mine, but my mother's, and countless others who suffered in silence. Today, we transform that pain into purpose." She gestured to the mansion behind her, its imposing facade softened by new gardens and cheerful banners announcing community programs. The Marie Bell Johnson Center will offer job training, legal aid, counseling, and safe spaces for anyone facing workplace abuse or discrimination. Our doors are open to all who need support, regardless of their background. Clara's gaze found the memorial plaque near the entrance, bearing her mother's image. The photograph showed Marie in her younger days, smiling with quiet dignity. The way Clara chose to remember her. "My mother taught me that true strength isn't about power over others. It's about lifting each other up, especially when the world tries to push us down." Clara's voice grew stronger. She worked in this house for 15 years, giving everything she had, only to have her spirit broken by cruelty and injustice. The audience was completely still now, hanging on every word. Clara saw tears in several eyes, including some of the former staff who'd known her mother. But today, we reclaim this space in her name. Where there was once exclusion, we create welcome. Where there was shame, we build pride. Where there was silence, we raise our voices. She outlined the center's programs, education initiatives, small business support, mental health services, everything she'd wished for during her own struggles, now available to anyone in need. This transformation wouldn't have been possible without every person who stood up and spoke out, Clara acknowledged. The whistleblowers who risked everything for truth. The journalists who refused to let our story be buried. The lawyers who fought for justice, not just victory. DeMarcus ducked his head modestly as scattered applause broke out. Beside him, Inez Morales smiled, her reporter's notebook open on her lap. But most of all, Clara continued, this belongs to every worker who ever felt trapped, afraid, or alone. Your stories matter. Your dignity matters. And this center exists to ensure you never have to face those battles without support. She turned slightly, addressing the mansion itself and all the ghosts it held. In this place where I once served drinks, we'll now serve hope. Where I was told to be invisible, we'll help people shine. Where I was humiliated, we'll restore pride. Darnell wiped his eyes quickly, trying to maintain his teenage composure. But Clara saw their mother's strength in his face, in the way he held himself tall despite emotion. The fund created by our settlement has already helped over 200 families, she reported. But this is just the beginning. Through the center's programs, we'll reach thousands more. Every person who walks through these doors carries dreams worth fighting for. The breeze picked up, rustling through the new garden's leaves. Clara remembered her mother's love of growing things, how she'd somehow kept hope blooming even in barren soil. So, today, we plant new seeds, Clara said, her voice full of quiet conviction. Seeds of change, of justice, of healing. And we water them with the truth of our stories, the strength of our unity, and the power of our refusal to be silenced. She looked out at the sea of faces, black, white, brown, young, old, wealthy, struggling, all united in this moment of transformation. Welcome to the Marie Bell Johnson Community Center, Clara concluded. May it stand as proof that dignity can rise from degradation, that justice can grow from pain, and that every voice deserves to be heard. The applause was thunderous, people rising to their feet in waves. Darnell bounded up to hug her, his arms strong and secure around her shoulders. As others approached to shake her hand or share their own stories, Clara felt her mother's presence almost tangibly. Not in sorrow now, but in triumph. Later that night, after the celebrations ended and the last visitors departed, Clara sat at her small desk at home. Her journal lay open before her, its pages filled with years of hopes, fears, and dreams. She'd started writing in it the day she began working for the Danforths, needing somewhere to pour out her unspoken thoughts. The lamp cast a warm glow as she picked up her pen, ready to close this chapter of her journey. The words flowed easily now, unlike the tear-stained entries of months past. Her handwriting was steady, matching the peace in her heart. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please share it with your friends and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.